Just minute, I'm going live. Please start.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you all on behalf of Shakti Abhiyan team in the lecture series Shakti Chintana. This is our first talk in English, and we have invited the renowned Indian historian Mridula Mukherjee ji. We all welcome you, ma'am. Thanks a lot to become a part of our women movement journey, ma'am. Shakti Abhiyan. Shakti Abhiyan is an initiative of IYC. We women are not happy with the status quo in every power structure. So we collectively join this movement to capture and occupy the power. So in this Shakti Abhiyan across India in 20 to 21 states, we have thousands of women who are committed, dedicatedly working towards this movement. They operate through our Shakti clubs. Shakti Club is the smallest and fundamental unit of women-centric politics that aims to reclaim power at every space. So now, allow me to introduce our guest, Mrs. Mridula Mukherjee ji. She has been teaching history in various institutions. He has been a renowned professor, and he has been the She has taught history at the Center for Historical Studies, JNU, over 4 decades. She was director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library from 2006 to 2011 and Dean School of Social Sciences, JNU, from 2012 to 2014. She has been visiting professor and a fellow to various international institutions and educational institutions, and she has co-authored 2 books, India's Struggle for Independence and India Since Independence, both bestsellers published by Penguin. And she has also authored Presence in India, Nonviolent Revolution, Sage, 2004, and Colonizing Agriculture, The Myth of Punjab Exceptionalism, Sage, at 2006, and RSS School Textbook and Murder of Mahatma Gandhi, The Hindu Communal Project, also in 2007. She is also the editor of Sage series in modern Indian history, with 18 manuscripts have already been published by Mridula ji. So it's an honor to welcome you, ma'am. So the Shakti Chintana is a series knowledge sharing session through which we want to improve our listening skills through expert talk. Indira Gandhi's legacy in today's context is the topic for us today. Indira means beauty. Generally, the name means beauty, but she completely refined the word. Whenever we want to address a girl with courage, we call her as Indira Gandhi. So she has been the most decisive prime minister in the Indian history. This movement requires at least thousands of Indiras for a strong base. So we are overwhelmed to listen to the topic, ma'am. Please proceed and share your insights with us, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Should I begin?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm very grateful to the organizers of this event, the Shakti Abhiyan, and particularly to Shraddha, who has first contacted me and asked me to come and speak to all of you. And this has given me an opportunity to get to know about the work which you people are doing. I say very frankly that I was not aware of this program, which has been launched by the Congress. And I'm very happy to hear that it has been done, and particularly the details which I got to know today in the beginning of this session before the meeting started, I could ask a lot of questions about what it's all about, and that makes me very happy to know that such an initiative has indeed been started. I think there is urgent need for this kind of program. And what I would emphasize, as Shraddha said, that the idea is to try and revive some of the spirit and values and ideals of the struggle for freedom, you know, to reinvigorate the Congress and these movements which are part of that with those ideals about which we do not hear so much. And I particularly liked her uh, description that what they are trying to do is to tell people, don't keep running to Delhi all the time. Make Delhi come to you. If you work and if you are strong, they are the ones who will need your support and your strength, and they will come to you. So we have to reverse the whole structure, the way things are at the moment. So I think that's a very, very worthy ideal, and I'm very, very happy to be part of this initiative. I wish this great success. I hope that in the coming days, all of you will achieve the objectives for which you are struggling. And it's
Yeah.
also very nice to be in conversation with women, and especially younger women from so many different walks of life. As I'm told, people here in this group belong to various parts of India, and they come from various professions. Some are full-time, working full-time, others are not. Sometimes the people are fully in politics. It's a mixed group, and I think that's what makes this very, very interesting. So to get to the subject of the talk, for which I've been invited today, which is to discuss what is the legacy of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which is relevant for us today. In today's context, what are those aspects of her legacy which we can find useful, which we can find inspiring, from which we can learn, from which we can benefit for our own work, and from which we can take to give to society today? What are those aspects? See, the thing is that uh, trying to talk about Indira Gandhi uh, is, as a historian, the very difficult task, especially in one lecture, because she did so much, and it was also a very interesting, difficult, and complex life that she lived, with many contradictions, with many difficulties, with many successes, with many tragedies that she had to face. So talking about her is not easy, because, you emphasize on one thing, inevitably you leave out something else. And I don't want to present to you a black and white kind of picture, where things are either this way or that way, because that's not the way she was. She was a very complex personality, and she had showed enormous fortitude, enormous courage, enormous fighting abilities, enormous ability as at leadership. At the same time, she did make some very serious mistakes in her assessments, you know. So I think when we are looking back on the career and life of a person like Indira Gandhi, it's very important to remember this, that we are talking about a real human being, not a heroine. She's not a somebody that we are taking from cinema, or from some heroine from medieval period where Rani Ki Jhansi or, something like that, where we are only talking about, how great she was, what courage she showed, those are very important things. But I think the complexity is what interests me. And I think as women, this is inspiring for us because we all know how difficult and how complex our lives are. When the achievements that we are able to make in our lives come often at a very great cost. We have to fight often for very small things. We have to put up very big fights. We also know that we are surrounded by a society in which uh, it's not easy. It's not made easy for women to uh, be able to express their needs, their desires, their ambitions. An ambitious woman will be looked down upon often as being too, too worldly wise, too grasping, because women are supposed to be sacrificing. Women are not supposed to want power. Women are not supposed to, as I said, be ambitious. So a decisive, like somebody said, and she was the most decisive prime minister. Yeah, now that's a thing used for her. But otherwise, this is the kind of thing that would be held against a woman. You know, Men are supposed to be decisive. Women are supposed to be the opposite of that. So when women break stereotypes, it's often very difficult, the process through which they go. And so was it for her. So I would, in my talk with you, also like to highlight uh, the struggles that Indira Gandhi had to go through uh, throughout her life, and what she became and what she was, her achievements and her contribution become all the more admirable if we understand the difficulties through which she had to pass in order to reach where she reached. Now, even if I'll give you, and I won't, in full detail, there won't be enough time to go into all the different aspects. But I would just like to mention that even as far as her childhood is concerned, there may be a common perception that since she was born into a very rich, well-to-do family, her, a grandfather, Motilal Nehru, was already a very well-established political leader of the Indian national movement. When she was born in 1917, he had already been active in politics for at least almost more than 25 years before that, and was a major leader of the national movement by that time. And he was a very prosperous lawyer, one of the richest lawyers. That she would have had a very easy, comfortable, pampered childhood. You know, on the contrary, I think it's so important to remember that right from almost from the time that she was born, within 2 years or 3 years, the family came under the influence of Mahatma Gandhi. And Jawaharlal Nehru, her father, plunged into the national movement under Gandhi's leadership. And in 1920-21, the non-cooperation first big movement that took place when Indira was only 3 years or 4 years old, he already had to go and spend a stint in jail. So right from a very early age, she faced this. Even her even her grandfather went to jail. Though he was quite advanced in age by then, Motilal Nehru. So the family, and also the family had given up its luxurious life under the influence of Mahatma Gandhi and adopted a very simple lifestyle. So it was not as if she was brought up in a kind of very affluent, rich, pampered kind of lifestyle. On the other hand, she had to face the deprivation of her father was hard. Even when he was outside the jail, as he himself says, he had hardly any time or mental space even for a child, for his child. It was much later, and he realizes it, and he says that I was so taken up with the freedom movement. My mind was just so full of the nationalism and the struggle that I hardly had any time for my wife and my child. You know, so that must have been obviously a very difficult time uh, for her and for her mother. And in fact, the one way of communication that Jawaharlal Nehru then developed with his daughter was to write letters from jail. So we have the famous letters from a father to a daughter, which he wrote from jail and which later became a very popular book. So she suffered from childhood, she suffered. And when she was about 10, 12 years old, the civil disobedience movement started, the one which was inaugurated, Gandhiji, with the Dandi March, the salt satyagraha. And then again, her father went to jail. Her grandfather went to jail and he fell very ill. And in fact, he died during the course of that movement. And in fact, her mother became very active at that time and joined street protests. Even her grandmother joined street protests. So she went through a tough time as a very young child. And in fact, she was so inspired by the freedom movement that she formed a little group of young children and called them, the Bandar Sena, the Vanar Sena, and they would go around parading and like acting as if they were fighting for the battle for freedom. So I just wanted to say that. And then in the 30s, she was studying at Shantiniketan in school. She was not even 18 years old when her mother fell very seriously and grievously ill and had to be sent to Switzerland uh, for treatment, from which she never recovered and died over there. And Indira was pulled out of the school, out of Shantiniketan, and sent with her mother because there was no one else who could look after her. Her father was in jail. Jawaharlal Nehru was in jail. In fact, he was released only when Kamala's condition grew so bad that it was very clear that she was not going to last very long. So then he was allowed to go to Switzerland, and but she could not be saved. So she lost her mother at a very young age, had to look after her in her dying days alone in a foreign land. So you can see that it was not some kind of fairy tale childhood that she went through. And in fact, many people have suggested that perhaps some of her insecurities and uh, inability often to trust people came because of this tough childhood that she had to go through. So, and then of course she had a very unconventional marriage. Her husband was the man she chose to marry, belonged to another religion. He was a Parsi and he was much older than her. So there was a lot of opposition. And so she had to, face that within the family also. But finally, she did marry him. And Jawaharlal Nehru was again back in jail in 1942 in the Quit India movement. And her first child was born when, she was alone at home. There was no mother, there was no father, there was no grandmother, no grandfather, no. And when Rajiv Gandhi was born, the news reached Jawaharlal Nehru in the jail in Ahmednagar Fort that you have a grandchild now. So I'm just trying to give you a little background picture because we have this image of, this tough Durga image of Indira Gandhi, the only man in the cabinet and whatnot. So we need to know what actually the person was. And then, as we know, she didn't have a very happy married life, and after a few years, uh, did not live together with her husband. Then she had to, when Jawaharlal Nehru became the Prime Minister of India, she had to take on, and her mother was not there. Uh, so she had to take on the responsibility of looking after the Prime Minister's household and also be his companion. She used to go with him on foreign tours, on Indian tours, look after the guests, run the whole establishment, which is not a small job, and take care of her father, take care of her young sons who were growing up, So she had a tough life growing up. It wasn't like a bed of roses. And as far as politics is concerned, she really begins to take some part in actively. I think we need to, of course, remember that, she may formally have started taking part only when she was in her 30s. That was in the mid 1950s or so. But, she was born in the lap of politics. I mean, at home, when her grandfather, her father, the whole family was in the freedom struggle, relatives. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, her aunt, was a member of the UP legislative, became a member of the UP Legislative Assembly in 1937, you know. So you can imagine Vijay Lakshmi Pandit's husband was also in jail. So the whole family was involved in the national movement in many ways, So politics was very much part of her, life from the time that she's born. So, but formally, she started taking the part in the work of the International Congress from about the mid 1950s. And then she became Congress president in the year 1959. And then when after Nehru's death, uh, when unfortunately Lal Bahadur Shastri, who succeeded him, passed away within 19 months, the issue came up of who should be the prime minister. And at that point in the Congress party, there were these very senior leaders, who were called the syndicate, and who had also decided that Shastri should succeed. And now they decided that Indira was the right person to uh, succeed. And they chose her. Another interesting thing is that the reasons for which they chose her were very typical male reasons. They thought that since she's a woman, she doesn't have a very strong position in politics. She's not independently really, established a position for herself. She'll be very pliable. They will be able to, she will do what they want her to do, and that's how they chose her. And so she accepted and she became. But as we know, in a matter of 2 or 3 years, Indira became very much her own person. She was able to uh, find her own place. She was able to, in fact, resist over time and change her position within the party and became a very, very powerful prime minister. I think this period also I find very fascinating, and for anybody studying Indira Gandhi, they should look at this period. 1966, she becomes the prime minister on Shastri's death, and that is a very tough period because in the 1967 the general elections are held and Congress does pretty badly all over the country. So her position becomes very weak. But syndicate's position also becomes very weak because they are the ones who's been deciding everything. And then she decides that, she has to really find her own way. And then very uh, carefully, she plans, she makes her own alliances, alignments. And that is when she takes what we call this leftward turn in Indian politics, where she decides to take on the challenge of these senior leaders syndicate who really represent the right wing within the Congress, with the help of people and with the help of an ideology which was more a center left ideology. And things came to a head with the election of V.V. Giri uh, to the presidentship. What happened was that the Congress syndicate wanted to put up Nijalingappa, who was their man, as the president. Now, once that was done, Indira Gandhi's position would have become very weak. So she didn't want that. She didn't want their person to be the president of the country. So she then supported V.V. Giri, who was the vice president and who was standing as an independent. She supported him and she asked the congressmen to vote with their conscience, also mobilize support from left parties and all that. And they managed to defeat Nijalingappa, who was the candidate of the syndicate. And that is how she won her first major battle against the Congress right wing, and through that established her authority and power over Indian politics. So her first major successful attempt to become her own person was when she backed V.V. Giri, and V.V. Giri won, and he became the president of India, and he was beholden to her. After this, then she undertook a series of radical progressive measures in order to strengthen her position and to strengthen the position of her allies. And this is the period, again, it's a very interesting period. And one very important measure that she takes at this time, two very important measures, but we can, maybe discuss about one a little more because that's more important. Abolition of the privy purses of the princes. You all must have heard about that. Those people who used to be heads of riyasats, states under the British. At the time of independence, they had been promised, they gave up they merged into India, but they had been promised that every year they would be given a certain amount of money as a kind of stipend. And some of it was quite substantial. So she abolished that, and that was a very popular measure because people felt, why should these people be unnecessarily now, so many 20 years after independence, still be getting money from the taxpayer? Secondly, and structurally far more important, she nationalized the banking system. All right. All the big banks, private banks, mind you, were nationalized. Now, this was very important, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about it, why it was so important. See, with the nationalization of, and there were 14 banks which were nationalized, and these were big banks, owned by big people. United Commercial Bank, for example, owned by the Birlas. So it was a big measure to overnight to take over huge banks which were owned by big Indian business. So the result of this particular measure that she took was very significant. And some very important consequences flowed from this. And the first and the foremost thing that happened was that these banks, after they were nationalized, were then asked that you all have to open branches in rural areas. Till then, most of these banks were based in urban areas, and the rural sector only had the cooperative banks, which were very small. Their capital was very small compared to these big banks. So it became compulsory for them to open branches in rural areas. This was a very radical measure because for the first time, the banking system reached the rural poor. It reached the farmers, it reached the rural folk of all kinds. Secondly, the public sector banks were told that your job is to provide credit to ordinary people and without asking for collateral. For example, you provide a loan to a taxi driver to buy a taxi. You provide a loan to an auto driver to buy an auto. You provide a loan to somebody who wants to set up a little business, again, without them having to have, pledge anything or show any collateral or mortgage something. So this was the first time that also, of course, to small industry, not just to big industry. Earlier, the bigger banks, they would only give to very, very big industry because those loans would be safe. So here, the whole system of credit changed and credit became available to ordinary people for the first time. So it was a very popular measure. Similarly, for example, to buy tractors in rural areas, you know, to buy agricultural equipment, all this became available for the first time. The other thing that it did was that it, by going into the rural sector, by going into those sections of society which were not touched earlier, they were able to mop up the deposits. Earlier, nobody went and asked the people to open an account in their bank. The poorer people, the ordinary person, the middle class person, especially in the smaller towns, in the rural areas. And this is the money which was lying, often in the form of gold or some other savings or whatever. People had other ways in which they saved whatever they did for a rainy day, but not in the bank. So now the banks actively went around asking people to make deposits in the public sector banks. And they knew also that these were safe because these are all nationalized public sector banks. They are guaranteed by the state. So it was a whole new phenomenon. And this made her very, very popular. And it changed the nature of banking in India. Also, think about it. When so much new deposits come into the banking sector, new money comes in, which was not there earlier, more credit becomes available to lend to industry, to public sector. Earlier, public sector was dependent mainly on the resources from taxation. Government would have to give money. Now, from the banking sector, the public sector could be funded. Loans could be extended to the public sector, also to the private sector. Ultimately, the private sector also benefit because more money became available for them to take loans. So this was a radical change that she brought about in the banking sector in India, the consequences of which I can only just indicate to you. And this was certainly tied up with, achieving the objectives of egalitarianism, of equity, of reaching out to the poor, of providing livelihoods, which were very much part of the ideals of the Constitution. So I think the bank nationalization measure was something this was remember, this was 1969. This is before 1971 elections, when she gave the slogan of Garibi Hatao. So this period from about 68, 69 till 71 is the period when she is increasingly turning in a leftward direction, and it comes to a fruition. The height of it, in a sense, is the Garibi Hatao slogan, which she gives for the elections, which she brings forward. Elections were due in 72. She brings them forward by a year, goes to the people, because this is to secure her position. She's now feeling comfortable enough because, as I told you, in the 67 elections, the Congress didn't do very well and her position was weak. So she knew that she's now stronger and she can go to the people. And in fact, she came back with a resounding success and she got more than two-thirds. The Congress party got more than two-thirds of the seats in the Lok Sabha. So much so that they could now make constitutional amendments if they wanted to. So this was one very important thing. The other radical measure which she undertook was in the field of land reform. And here, what I want to talk about is but I'll have to explain a little bit of the background also to you, but talk about how the land ceiling legislation was implemented. See, I'll have to give you a little bit of background on Indian land reform to explain the importance of this. See, after independence, we embarked on a major program of land reform in India. This was also a consequence of the pre-independence struggles of the Indian people. The peasants had been very active in the freedom struggle. They had been active in peasant movements. In various, all India, there was a Kisan Sabha movement. There were big peasant leaders like Swami Sejanand, Indulal Yagnik, N.G. Ranga. Congress party itself mobilized peasants. The Congress Socialist Party was very active among the peasants. The Communist Party was very active among the peasants. So pre-independence period had a very radical and powerful peasant political presence. So after independence, and Congress party was committed to land reform. So after independence, in the first phase, the emphasis was on zamindari abolition. That is breaking up the big landlord estates, whether they were called jagirdars or whether they were called zamindars or whatever be the local name for it. The whole emphasis was first on Jagirdari abolition and Zamindari abolition. And this started in the late 40s, early 50s. And this process went on for about 7 to 8 years because legislation had to be passed in each state because it was a state subject. And everywhere it was resisted, the landlords resisted it, the people went to court and cases were there, constitutional amendments had to be brought in order to implement it. It was a very tough and long process. And in this, the emphasis was to take away the rights of the big landlords and to give the land to cultivate, to ownership rights to the tenants. But it's a complicated story because there are various categories of tenants, occupancy tenants, tenants at will. I can't go into that whole story. But anyway, the emphasis was on this particular aspect of land reforms. Do away with big landlordism and distribute, give the land ownership to the people who were cultivating that land on a tenancy basis. Now, by the 1960s, this phase had, in a sense, the benefits of whatever it was had completed itself, and it was seen that there were many deficiencies still in the process of land reform, which had to be rectified. And here the main thing was that there should be how to make more land available for distribution to those who are landless, especially the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes and the who are the landless people in the villages, or those who were temporary tenants and didn't have proper tenancy rights. How to make more land available to them. So the answer was that you impose a land ceiling. So that the idea being that no family could own more than a certain amount of land. If you had certain amount of land, if you had more than that, then that land was called surplus land and you had to give it up. So in different provinces, the number was different, etc. So from Indira Gandhi's time in the late 60s, various committees were set up, Congress, outside Land Reform Committee, and by early 1970s, a plan was made how to go about this, and this started to be implemented from about 1972 onwards. This is all Indira Gandhi's period initiative. And the result of this was that land became available, surplus land became available to distribute to the poor. And for the first time, people who earlier had no land rights, small plots of land, they got 3 acres, 4 acres, 2 acres, but they got land. And this was a major, major change. And okay, now there were many deficiencies in this, not enough land to give to everybody. Many people were able to hide their land and not give it up. All that was there. But over time, what happened was that the back of the big landlords had already been broken with the Zamindari abolition. And with this, because it was illegal to own more than a certain amount of land, and usually it was there was a notion of a family holding, that is a one plow holding with a family of 5 members, and double of that was the land ceiling. That was a rough kind of thing. So anyway, so over time, what happened was through subdivision of land, through inheritance, land being divided in the next generation among 3 or 4 children, the size of the land holdings in India within the next 20 years, 85% of the land holdings were below 5 acres, below 10 or 15 acres, I forget the exact figure, but very small holdings. So essentially, what you got was that the process of this land ceiling legislation put a check to the process of a possible process of depeasantization. You see, if there was no ceiling on land, the richer people in the rural area over time would buy up the land of the smaller peasants and get bigger and bigger holdings. All right. But since there was a land ceiling law and it was illegal to own land above a certain amount, it was not advantageous to do that. So essentially, it killed the land market in India and thereby protected the interests of the smaller peasants. This was if you think about it, was a very, very radical consequence. And again, it is something very much, in conformity with the broad objectives of what we struggled for our independence, what is embodied in the Constitution, that we will not have concentration of wealth. We will have a more equitable system. There will be checks on accumulation of property beyond a certain. This was certainly the spirit of that time. As you know, Indira Gandhi had also imposed what it was then called. It was called the MRTP Act, which was against monopolies. So that in industry also, she had brought in a law that you could not have a monopoly over a certain industry, and if you grew too big, then there was a limit beyond which you could not grow. This was criticized later as being, something that would come in the way of economic growth. But that's another story. I'm not going into that now. But these two things I certainly did want to talk about. And also, I think it's very important for us to remember that and I haven't mentioned the emergency yet, that during the emergency also, certain very radical legislation was undertaken. And particularly, I like to mention two. One was the distribution of house sites to the poor, especially to the scheduled castes and particularly scheduled castes. You might know from your own experience in many villages, even today, when you go travel, you'll see there will be this place which will usually called Indira Colony. And this Indira Colony is house sites which were given to the scheduled castes from the village common land or the surplus land in order to build, because earlier under the older system the scheduled caste often had no right to even the land on which they had their huts. So if the landlords and the richer cultivators got angry with them, upper caste people, they could just throw them off that land because they had no property rights at all. They had no property rights even on the village common land. So this was a very radical step. Number two, what she did was she abolished what is called debt bondage. That is Bandhua Mazdoor Pratha, as we call it in Hindi. You know, you know that there still is. It's not as if this doesn't exist even now, but it became illegal and essentially it was abolished to a very, very large extent, which is that the landowners would give loans to the laborers who are working on their land and then say that you are my bonded labor. Because I have given you a loan, till you return this loan, this debt, you are bonded to me. You are like my slave. And this bondage would never end. And lot of the bonded labor were children, were very vulnerable. So during the emergency, Indira Gandhi made it illegal, and campaigns were undertaken, measures were undertaken, activists worked on this in the rural areas in order to abolish this practice. So I particularly wanted to mention in her radical measures these things, and I think she is remembered even today as Indira Amma, especially in South India, as the mother of the poor, because of some of these very radical measures that she undertook, which actually helped the poor, and the people felt that they had helped them. Okay, two things. The time is quickly running out. If I'm not wrong, it's already 7:05. Um, Two things I want to mention. One, and this I talked about yesterday at some length, but today I'll just do it more briefly. One, that is the period of the emergency. And my main point is that we should not hesitate. When we talk about Indira Gandhi, we should not be embarrassed. We should not hesitate to discuss what was the emergency. We need to understand the background to how it happened, why it happened. And we also need to discuss what happened during the course of the emergency. We need to discuss its negative impacts, face up to them, and accept that, yes, anybody can make mistakes. And if it was a mistake, we should accept that it was a mistake. More important, we need to understand. We need to study it. And there, what I had emphasized yesterday was that there was a long build up to the declaration of the emergency. It didn't happen suddenly out of the blue. Indira Gandhi was at the peak of her popularity, 1972, 1973. She had, the Bangladesh war, the, etc., etc. She used to be called Durga and whatnot. And then suddenly the economic situation started to go really bad in India. It was a series of unfortunate things which happened. First one was the oil shock. In 1973, world oil prices, which had nothing to do with us, they quadrupled, meaning they went up 4 times. And since we imported most of our oil, it was a huge blow, economic blow. So what happens when something like that? Inflation. Prices go up because the fuel price. Fuel affects everything. So the prices went up. Secondly, bad crop years. We faced bad crops. So a combination of circumstances happened, and as a result of that, there were agitations which started in different parts of the country. The first one being the Navnirman agitation in Gujarat, where students and other sections of society, it was mainly against price rise, but it went into a completely non-constitutional methods, and they went into gheraos and put so much pressure on the duly elected government, so much so that that government was forced to resign. That whetted the appetite of these forces, and very gradually in different parts of India, in northern India particularly, Bihar, Chhatra Parishad, this, that, and the other, all kinds of such movements started. And JP, Jayaprakash Narayan, who earlier was a member, as you know, of the Congress Socialist Party, and who then had been with with Vinoba Bhave in the Bhudan movement, had given up electoral politics, suddenly emerged out of the wilderness and became the leader of this anti-Indira protest. And gradually, and within a very short time, this movement, they sort of thought that they will be able to force Indira out of power. And they started becoming more and more aggressive, to the point that they started calling for the army and the police not to obey the orders of the government. And then they held a big rally and they threatened in Delhi that they will gheraw the house of the prime minister and not allow her to move out till she resigned. It was in these circumstances that Indira Gandhi imposed the emergency. She had tried her best to talk to JP. She had even said, next year election is coming. You also fight, I will also fight. Let the people decide. And in 76, the election was due. By February 76, there had to be an election. But they would not wait. They wanted to force her out of power. So some people would say she had no choice but to do this. Well, I think she had a choice, and maybe that's where she made her first mistake, which was just as she had done in 1971. She could have preponed the elections by 1 year, thrown a challenge. Instead of imposing emergency, she could have dissolved the parliament and given a call for fresh elections 2 months, 3 months later, and thus diffused the whole movement and gone to the people, and she would probably have won. There is no reason to believe that she would not have won. But anyway, whatever it was, she made the choice. She imposed the emergency. And emergency, as I already said, she also used it to undertake many radical measures, including against communal forces. She banned the RSS, for example. But there were also negative aspects to the emergency, bound to be, because emergency means suppression of free speech, free press, freedom of association. Many people thousands of people were put into jail, etc., etc. So obviously there were very negative aspects to the emergency. There was the sterilization drive, which went all wrong, etc., etc. So my main point is that we need to look objectively at this. And we also need to remember that she's the one who actually then also removed the emergency. She lifted the emergency. How many examples do we have of dictators doing that on their own? It wasn't as if there was some very powerful movement which forced her to lift the emergency. She did it out of her own volition because she didn't like the emergency. She did think of it as a short-term stopgap measure in order to curb what she thought were anti-national elements, dangerous situation on the ground. So she did lift it and ordered elections, and she lost. And she gracefully stepped down. She didn't try to then say no, 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 like Mr. Trump, that I will not accept the verdict of the people. She did hand over the power peacefully, and 3 years later she came back. So in a way, people forgave her for the emergency, we can say. If they did not forgive her, they wouldn't have brought her back in 80. They thought they had punished her by throwing her out of power. And now that they had done that and seen what the alternative was, they again voted her back to power in 1980. So I think it's a complex story, and we need to look at it in a complex way. And the last point which I want to emphasize is that she was and in today's context, it becomes even more important that she was a steadfast fighter against all kinds of communalism. She did not countenance any kind of communalism, whether it was majority or minority. She was very critical, and even in fact, when she first took over as prime minister, they tried the Hindu communal forces. They tried to derail her. They organized a big agitation on the issue of cow slaughter, where in the heart of Delhi on Parliament Street, thousands of people led by sadhus tried to storm into the parliament, and there was firing, and people died, and this, that, and the other. Right in the very beginning, they tried to destabilize her, but she stood her ground. She was firm. She never gave in to the communal forces. She fought them head on, and she was very conscious. She understood what they were. She understood their negative aspects, and she was never fooled by their talk of being Hindu Rashtra being only another name for the Indian Rashtra, and Hindu nationalism being another name for Indian nationalism. She understood exactly what communalism was, having known of it from the pre-independence days. She had gone through the whole partition riots. She herself was very brave. She had jumped into the crowds and tried to prevent people from, hurting each other and all that. So she was a very brave woman. But apart from that, she understood the negative impact of communalism. And I would also say that she paid the price with her life of trying to stand up against Sikh communalism. Now, you can go on debating whether Blue Star was right or wrong, should have been done this way or that way, but nobody can deny that it was a very much a communal group that had taken over the Golden Temple, a religious sacred place, and they were indulging in terror activities in Punjab for more than from 83 onwards. And it was after a lot of deliberation that she finally decided that she had no choice but to throw them out, drive them out of the Golden Temple, and to curb what was going on. And she knew that it was a very dangerous thing that she was doing, and that her life would be in danger, but she did it. And also, she refused when she was given the advice that do not have Sikh guards in your inner circle because they may be affected by this Blue Star and could go. So she said, no, I cannot do that. And her answer was, I thought we were secular. So she continued with the Sikh guards inside her house and paid the price with her life, but stood up because she felt that it was a necessary thing which had to be done. Otherwise, it was a grave danger to the unity of India. So I think I will stop there. Quite a lot of time has been taken, I think, almost 1 hour. So, and let's have the questions.
Okay. Hello everyone. You can raise your hands for question and answer session. We can go one by one. Those who have the questions, please raise your hands. We can go one by one. Am I audible?
Yes, Jamal, you are audible.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Jamal.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Bhavani, you can please speak.
Okay.
Why don't you ask people to put their questions in writing? That will make it faster.
Okay, sure,
Okay.
sure.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. It is very great to see you. I am Bhavani from Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
Can you please tell about the Indo-Bangladesh war? I mean, Indo-East Pakistan, where Indira Gandhi liberated Bangladesh from Pakistan.
Yeah. What do you want to know about it?
I heard this, how she came to the decision of creating Bangladesh instead of
Well, I don't think it was her decision to create Bangladesh. It was the people of East Bengal who decided to create Bangladesh because they were being completely suppressed by the politicians from West Pakistan. Awami League had got a majority, but they didn't want to allow them to become the prime minister, so they refused. And that led to rebellion in East Bengal or East Pakistan, who said, then we don't want to anymore to be with you. So then there was very severe repression. This was from March 1971, and 10 million people over time came over to India. And also they formed a freedom fighters organization called the Mukti Bahini, which was fighting against the Pakistani army and fighting for Bangladesh. And essentially they took shelter in India, and Indira Gandhi and the Indian army also helped to train them. And they would go back and they would fight. And the main thing, of course, was that she built public opinion in favor of Bangladesh, that there is no other way except because the people of Bengal are not going to accept domination of West Pakistan. She also built public opinion in the whole world, especially to explain India's position, because India, after all, gave shelter to 10 million people from there who were running away from the violence, to escape the repression. So to said that, we cannot hold these people here forever, they have to go back. And they will not go back unless there is an independent Bangladesh. So she built the whole, public opinion. And then but she was also very smart. She didn't take the first step. She didn't declare war on Pakistan. She, waited till it suited us, and 9 long months it took for that to happen. And then finally in December, and a lot of things happened in between. The Americans threatened us. The Seventh Fleet was sent to the Bay of Bengal. Seventh Fleet is their big naval uh, ship, which a fleet, it's a whole thing. They're sent to the Bay of Bengal to intimidate us. So she then made alliance with the Soviet Union in order to counter that. So it's a long story, but the main thing is that she had the guts to actually support. You see, and finally, Indian army had to go in because there was no other way left. But she waited so that it became clear that she was not the aggressor. And after defeating the Pakistani army, the power was handed over to the Bangladeshis. She didn't try to occupy Bangladesh or gain any advantage from it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have another question from Srinidhi. Hi, mostly people taunt the Congress people quoting Indiraji using the emergency provisions. How do we act to it? It's Srinidhi's question.
Sorry? How do
Uh,
we?
Mostly people taunt the Congress party uh, by quoting the emergency incident. So how do we act to it?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of time explaining that. I can't
Yeah.
repeat that.
Okay. So anyone else has questions? Neha Mehta, please continue.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Go ahead.
Ma'am, my question is why Indira Gandhi was more nationalist, but her father was socialist. He adopted socialist policies, and whereas Indira Gandhi was more nationalist person.
That's not a correct statement. Both were nationalist and socialist. She was also socialist. I just gave you so many examples. Nationalization, abolition of privy purses. So many examples I gave you. Land ceiling legislation. All these are socialist measures. And she was very much a nationalist. So was her father. He was a. How can you say he fought for freedom? He was 9 years he spent in jail. I don't know how you are making this kind of formulation.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
Uh, Actually, we do talk a lot about scientific temper of Jawaharlal Nehru ji. Is there any incident that quotes the scientific temper of Indira Gandhi ji?
Very much. In fact, she's the one who made it a part of the constitution. She made the constitutional amendment in which scientific temper has been added as part of constitution. She promoted science in a big way in India. Very big way. Don't forget
Yes,
how
ma'am.
much she did for science.
Yeah, people usually talk about Nehruji's scientific temper, but they
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
quote Indira Gandhi's
Yes.
scientific temper often. That
But
was
she
the
made it part of the constitution.
thing.
Hi, ma'am.
So if
Okay.
Hello, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, our constitution is already a secular constitution. Before Indira Gandhi add the word secular, is there any particular reason to add the word secular, the particular word?
Yeah. See, at the time of when the constitution was being made, this was discussed and it was felt that, some people may not be for it. There'll be unnecessary debate. As long as the spirit of the constitution is secular, its provisions are secular, everything about it is secular, there is perhaps no need to put the word in the beginning in the thing. But by the time Indira Gandhi, when she felt that it was a good thing to make it formal,
Yes, ma'am.
you know. So it's a
Yes,
question of the timing.
yes. Thank you, ma'am.
anybody else has questions, please let us wind up quickly.
Yeah, I do need to go. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's finish this session, ma'am.
Yes.
So it was It was great, enlightening evening to see how she was transferred to Indira in a process and how she fought for power structure, distributing the power structure. It was a great session, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, whoever participated. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah.